Hey everybody, welcome to another lesson of learning Japanese. In this lesson, we're going to continue exactly where we left off from the previous lesson, and that previous lesson was basically just conjugating verbs into their causative form. And so now we're going to cover how to actually use those verbs that have been conjugated into their causative form to basically make a sentence in the causative form construction. And so the function of the causative form here in the Japanese language should be pretty intuitive because it's going to be pretty much identical to the English language's causative form construction as well. The causative form construction in the Japanese language is going to mainly be used to say something along the lines of somebody made somebody else do verb. However, depending on the context, it can also carry on the meaning of somebody allows or lets somebody else do verb. And so we can see here that forcing somebody to do something and letting somebody do something that they probably want to do anyways are really drastically different things, and they're both going to be expressed with the causative form. So it's definitely going to be a good idea to get a look of how the causative form works depending on the context of the examples you have. And that's exactly why we're going to cover some with some example sentences. Before we jump into that, there is one last tidbit to mention here, and that is that the causative form construction here is going to be usable with both transitive and intransitive verbs. You can make somebody cry, which is an intransitive verb, and you can also make somebody eat something they don't want to eat, and that's a transitive verb. And the reason why we have to distinguish intransitive verb usage and transitive verb usage in the causative form construction in the first place is because depending on which one the verb is, we're going to use a different particle to mark the person that is being made to do the verb or is being allowed to do the verb. And so when we're using the causative form construction with intransitive verbs, the sentence structure that we're going to employ here is we're going to mark the subject of the sentence, the entity that made or let the other entity do the verb, with a wa or a ga, and then we're going to mark the entity that was forced to do the verb or allowed to do the verb with an O. And then what follows after that would basically just be the verb in its causative form. On the other hand, if we're going to use transitive verbs with the causative form construction, then we're still going to mark the subject of the sentence, the entity that made the other entity do the verb or allowed the other entity to do the verb, with a wa or a ga. But this time, we're going to mark that other entity that was forced to do the verb or allowed to do the verb with a ni instead of an o. And then what we are going to mark with the direct object particle o is of course the direct object to the verb. So with that said, now let's go into the examples to see how this works out. And so for our first two example sentences, we're going to use the causative form construction with intransitive verbs. So the entity that is being forced or allowed to do the verb will be marked with an o in these two examples. And so for our first example sentence, we have the rather simple line, kare wa kanojo o nakasete shimatta. And what this line is going to translate to is basically, whoop, he made his girlfriend cry. Let's break down the sentence bit by bit. First up, we have just and this is kind of just like an exclamatory sound you make of surprise. We have kare, which is going to translate to he. We have wa, marking he as the subject or the topic of the sentence. We have kanojo, this is going to be girlfriend or she, and this is going to be the entity that was forced by the subject of the sentence to do the verb or allowed to do the verb. We're going to mark kanojo with an o because she's the direct object, since we're going to be using an intransitive verb, and the intransitive verb that we're going to use is the verb naku, which means to cry. And so we change that into the causative form, so naku turns into nakaseru, but we're going to additionally employ the te form plus the verb shimao to basically mean regrettably completed doing the verb or irreversibly did the verb. So nakaseru turns into nakasete because we need it in its te form, and then we add shimao, and then we conjugate shimao into its past plain form shimatta because we're in the past here. And so once again, all together, kare wa kanojo o nakasete shimatta. And this is going to translate to whoops or oh, he went and made his girlfriend cry. For our next example sentence, we have the line puru no chikaku ni asobasenaide kudasai. And what this line is going to translate to is basically, please don't let them play near the pool. So the underlying context here is maybe a mother is talking to the babysitter and giving him or her instructions on how to care for the children. We're going to notice here that the causative form is being used to mean allow or to let as opposed to make or force. So let's break down the sentence bit by bit. First up, we have puru, which is going to be pool basically. We have no chikaku ni. Chikaku means basically near or the vicinity near. And so then puru no chikaku is going to be near the pool. We have the particle ni marking near the pool as basically location. And then we have asobasenaide kudasai. And this is going to be the verb asobu, which means to play. we're going to change it into its causative form, which is going to be asobaseru. Then we're going to change asobaseru into its nai form, so that then turns into asobasenaide, and then we add the particle de plus the word kudasai to mean please don't do that. So this is going to translate to please don't let them play. Then we add that with the first part of the sentence, near the pool, so please do not let them play near the pool is what this line says. Puru no chikaku ni asobasenaide kudasai. And of course, one last thing to note here is that we don't mark anything with the particle o, because we basically just drop that entity that is being forced or allowed to do the action because it is already understood given the context of the conversation. If it wasn't, then we simply would have added something along the lines of kodomo tachi o, and kodomo tachi is, of course, kodomo is children and tachi is the plural, so kodomo tachi is children. Then if we added that into the sentence, it would be basically please do not let the children play near the pool instead of please don't let them play near the pool. Okay, so now we're going to move on to transitive verbs with the causative form construction. And so for our first example, with transitive verbs, we have the line, Ano sensei wa hitori hitori no gakusei ni spichu o happyou saseru. And basically what this line is going to translate to is, that teacher makes each student present a speech. Let's break down the sentence bit by bit. First up, we have ano, and it's going to be that. We have sensei, which means teacher. We have wa, marking the teacher as the topic of the subject of the sentence. We have hitori hitori no gakusei, and this is going to be the noun of a noun modification. Hitori hitori is going to be basically mean each or every one. Then we apply that to gakusei, which means student, so basically each student. Then we mark hitori hitori no gakusei with the particle ni, because this is what we need to do for the entity that's being forced to do the action or allowed to do the action when it's going to be used with the transitive verb. Then we have the word spichu, which is going to be speech basically, and we're going to mark that with the direct object particle o, because this is the direct object to the verb. And then the verb is happyou suru, which means to present. This is going to be a verbal noun, so all we have to do is modify the suru, and suru is one of the irregular verbs for the causative form, so we're just going to change suru into its natural causative form conjugation, which is saseru. And that basically wraps it up. If we combine that with the rest of the sentence, we once again have ano sensei wa hitori hitori no gakusei ni spichu o happyou saseru, and that's going to mean that teacher makes every student present a speech. For our last example sentence, we have the simple line, Kino ryoshin wa watashi ni kuruma o arawaseta. And what this line is going to translate to is just basically, yesterday my parents made me wash the car. Let's break down the sentence bit by bit. First up, we have the time marker kino, which means yesterday. We have ryoshin, this is going to mean parents, and since this isn't being used with the beautifier go in front of it to be go ryoshin, which is what people will use to refer to other people's parents, then we know this is referring to one's own parents, and so ryoshin here is going to mean my parents. We mark them with the wa to make them the topic of the sentence. Then we have watashi ni, and so watashi is going to be me or I, and I am going to be the entity that is being forced to do the verb or allowed to do the verb. Now we'll see what that verb is after we find out what the direct object is, which is going to be kuruma, which means car. So the car, mark that with an o because it's going to be the direct object to the verb. And here comes the verb, it is arao, which is going to be to wash. Change that into the causative form, so arao turns into arawaseru. Then we change that into the plain past form, so it turns in turn to arawaseta. And so that translates to made wash. Made wash what? Made wash the car. Who made wash? Parents made wash the car. Made who wash? Parents made me wash the car yesterday. Kino ryoshin wa watashi ni kuruma o awaseta. And so there you go. That is using the causative form construction with both transitive and intransitive verbs. There's that tiny distinction between them about what particle to mark the entity that is being forced or allowed to do the action with. And that's really the only tricky thing there is to it, other than knowing the conjugation to the causative form beforehand, which in itself is actually pretty simple once you know how to conjugate verbs into their passive form, because these two forms are kind of just opposite sides of the same coin, and they follow very similar guidelines to being conjugated, and soon enough we're going to realize how close they really are when we combine them basically and cover the causative passive form. So do try to get this knowledge ingrained in your mind together with the other knowledge of the previous lessons, which are very related, so that we can move on to mastering this language.